Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to the first PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast of 2023, recorded on New Year's Day, not least. I'm Connor Southwell, joined by Paddy Davitt. This podcast obviously comes to you in association with Future Radio. I get the sense that 2022 might be a year that Norwich City are pleased to see the back of, particularly as when we delve into it a little bit later, that the record is not particularly great reading, and we will of course have a semi-review of the year that has just been later in the pods. But Pad, I think we're probably best to start with that Reading game and Norwich City and where they currently stand. Obviously, since we last recorded a pod, a fair bit has happened. We obviously did bring you some reaction to Dean Smith's sacking last week, but this is the first kind of formal podcast that we've sat down and spoken about it. So we're going to talk about that as well, and just as kind of a marker. At the start of the pod, we are recording this obviously on New Year's Day, as I mentioned, so between the Reading and Watford game. So we'll have a little preview to Watford at the end, but obviously I'm aware that a fair amount of people may well end up listening to this pod after that game has happened, so we don't want to talk about that one too much and really outdate the pod. So that's given you a little bit of a structure as to what we're doing. But Pad, let's start with the occasion, New Year's Day. How did you spend New Year's Eve? How did you see in the new year? Because I get the sense that our stories are going to be quite similar, if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah, happy New Year to you, Connor, and to our wonderful listeners. No, it was a very quiet one. Yeah, no. So you've got no excuse because you're considerably younger than me. But my days of being in some sort of I don't know, nightclub type setting long gone, and then scrambling for taxis at exorbitant prices and probably having paid exorbitant amounts to get into venues. That's probably maybe not even a thing now. Maybe you'd be able to update me on what the younger generation do. But no, it was a nice meal with my wife at home, and then just watching the fireworks via any news outlet you care to watch from London. So yeah. But then very swiftly after, it's Betty buys. So because obviously, we're ultimate media professionals, and we needed a clear head to get up and record this podcast today, and build into, as you say, part two of the Alan Russell and Steve Weaver show, which is Watford at Carrow Road. But probably the bigger picture at the minute is where they go with their head coach search, and the even bigger picture is once that person is in place, what can we look forward to for the second part of this season? Because as you rightly say, Connor, 22 was definitely, from a Norwich City perspective, a year to forget. But yeah, no, fairly quiet, fairly muted, a bit like Norwich City's 2022, I would imagine. So I'm going to throw that one back to you, Connor. What was happening in the Southwell household last night?
Yeah, mine was pretty uneventful as well, actually. Maybe says a bit more about me than anything else, but not really one for going out and stuff. So similar to you, had the TV on. I'd actually just recorded or just completed a double promotion with my Charlton Athletic team on Football Manager. So we've just taken them back to the Premier League, and bizarrely was in a title race with Ipswich. So there you go. So they've also got back to the Premier League. So that's how I spent my New Year's Eve, which was pretty unglamorous, but there we go. I had to make sure the dog was out and had done his business before obviously all the fireworks went off. So that was a bit of a race as well. So yeah, pretty uneventful. And then I think about half past midnight, I then departed for bed, and that was about as exciting as it got. So there we go. I think we're recording it. Well, at least there's no sore heads on this podcast, at least, and that means that we can at least provide some energy, and hopefully not too much energy for those people who are struggling on New Year's Day and have perhaps decided to tune in. But there we go. So Paddy, I mean, it is an interesting time in the world of Norwich City. It's the first day of 2023, and they begin it without a head coach. Or a permanent head coach, at least. Obviously, Alan Russell primarily, but also Steve Weaver took charge against Reading on Friday night. That ended with a 1-1 draw. Just very quickly, we'll reflect on that game because we've kind of done various bits on the channels about it. But what's kind of your overall assessment of that? Because I think people, and again, it's weighing up expectation with perhaps reality. So I think people arrived at Carrow Road feeling a lot more positive. Certainly, that obviously Dean Smith was no longer in post. I think we saw that energy and that positivity continue when the team news was announced. We saw more energy in terms of Norwich City performance. I'd probably say maybe not too much more quality in terms of their play. But again, you have to weigh that up against the reality, which is actually the temporary interim coaches, whatever you want to call them, had 2 days really in charge to impart whatever they wanted to impart. So when you weigh those various things up against each other, what's your reflections from Friday night and how that result and performance transpired?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with any of that. It did feel like clean air just around the place, or bloodletting, whatever phrase you want to sort of settle on, post Dean Smith and his key backroom team, which didn't include Alan Russell, as he was quick to point out to us when we went down to have a chat with Colney on the Thursday morning, as in one of his appointees. So you had that sense, I felt, ever since the decision had been made, purely taking the temperature from social media. But, when you got there physically to Carrow Road on Friday night, and then the team news dropped as well, which was very positive and backed up Alan Russell's words about, going on the front foot and trying to be aggressive, and, notably Ida and Sargent flanking Pookie. And of course, that was reflected then, as you rightly said, in terms of the atmosphere, aided by the chaps with the City Elite drum as well to amplify the atmosphere. But I think there was a general buy-in from all those who were present at Carrow Road, and it was a marked contrast from the rather toxic end to Dean Smith's tenure at Carrow Road previously against Blackburn. So night and day in terms of the mood around the place. And in terms of the result and the performance, yeah, I wouldn't disagree that positivity did run through what they were trying to do. But yeah, I mean, you're not going to, in 2 days, it doesn't matter if you're Sir Alex Ferguson and Arsene Wenger combined, you're not going to radically alter what this group have not been producing really on a consistent basis. And, I don't think anybody would be fooled by that moving forward, knowing that there's a lot of work ahead for whoever the new incumbent is. But in terms of, the result, I thought it was a fair result. I didn't think they did enough. The penalty was harsh. Felt it in real time. Felt it afterwards. Alan Russell certainly felt it as well. I think the Reading player was very cute, but ultimately, I don't think Reading you could discount that they probably did enough over the piece to probably earn a draw. And Norwich, as Alan Russell said, to be fair to him after the game, not clinical enough for all their kind of passages of good play, but equally, Reading had spells as well. So, it was, in terms of nudging the dial from the toxicity that we'd encountered mainly at Blackburn, but also, Luton as well, Boxing Day, which ultimately did for Dean Smith and his two coaches. That was achieved, absolutely. But, the bigger picture, and it was reiterated again in the statement by the club that confirmed Dean Smith's departure, promotion to the Premier League remains the aim. And yes, although that kick-off, I think they were 10th in a very congested pack. That moved them up 2 or 3 places as we record. There's more fixtures playing out today, New Year's Day. So they'll probably be in a similar sort of part of the table when the game swings round tomorrow night, or tomorrow afternoon, against Watford. And that's the bigger picture. So for all the kudos to what Russell and Weaver managed to achieve in one 90-minute game, irrespective of how it plays out against Watford, there's a hell of a long road ahead to get this group into the playoffs, let alone extricate them via the playoffs into the Premier League. I think the top 2's gone now. But I don't see Burnley or Sheffield United hemorrhaging points that would be required to bring them back to the pack or bring them back to Norwich particularly. So, the ambitions, unfortunately, have contracted, and now it's about trying to get into the playoffs first and foremost, and then trying to come through, which they did, of course, famously and pertinently, I think, given the situation they're in now in the 14-15 season under Alex Neil. This time of year they made the change, give or take a few weeks. Out went Neil Adams or moved internally. In came Alex Neil, and boy oh boy, we know what happened thereafter for that glorious 6-month charge to Wembley, Middlesbrough playoff final. Comprehensive performance and win at Wembley, and Premier League, here we come. And let's hope lightning can strike twice. But I think they're in that territory now. It's going to take whoever the new person is to be a very charismatic figure, and almost through a force of personality, I think, get some spark or some fire lit under this group of players. Because, hitherto, and okay, we saw a little bit more front foot positivity on Friday night last, but hitherto there's nothing in this group to suggest that they are capable at this stage of getting themselves in, the serious conversation, if you want to put it that way, to get back to the Premier League. So, yeah, it felt cleaner, it felt healthier, it felt more optimistic, but it's all relative and set against the backdrop of, they've put themselves in a very tight spot now, and the margin for error is pretty much vanished. So whoever does come in, it has to be quick, has to be swift, and it'll have to be the right appointment to galvanise this group in the short term to get into the playoffs first and foremost, because that by no manner of means is guaranteed.
Yeah, and I would expect over the next 10 to 12 games or so, actually, that playoff hunt, which is actually at the minute really condensed and really wide open and actually a little bit mad, to actually become a little bit more established. So this does feel like a really pivotal part of the season. I mean, Alan Russell said on Friday that he didn't feel that there's a minute to waste, let alone a game. So you actually look at that result maybe in the wider context, and it's now 1 win in 8 at Carrow Road for Norwich City. It's obviously another game that they've dropped points in after taking the lead. It's not a particularly great record. I mean, part of me would have been intrigued to see what the reaction would have been like to that fixture if Dean Smith was in charge, and obviously you have to wrap the appropriate context around that. Naturally, as you said, Pad, they as before Watford. As I said, we were recording this before then and before several games on New Year's Day, so this may get outdated fairly quickly. But the playoff mix is crazy. Only a few points separating. Basically, Blackburn in 3rd and Preston in 15th. I think that's there's about 5 points or so separating all those. 3 points from Sunderland, who sit in 4th, to Preston in 15th. So that gives you an idea of just how condensed it is. But Norwich City go into tomorrow's game, as things stand, sitting 7th. So that's just outside the playoffs. They obviously welcome Watford to Carrow Road on Monday. They sit 5th, and they, of course, were beaten 4-0 by Swansea on Friday. So it just sums up what a mad division it is. Just as a side note, I mean, not to turn this into an episode of Loose Women, but have Norwich ever had a better looking temporary head coach than Alan Russell? I mean, he's a former model. He lifted Christina Aguilera at the MTV Awards in 2003. Pat, I'll probably throw that over to you. I don't know if you even want to comment on that, but there's some food. Maybe that's one for the listeners to get in touch.
I think it's definitely one for the listeners. Yeah, I don't know who the runners and riders are. Would that be including Gunny and Neil Adams? Maybe you can debate. Mike Phelan, there you go. There's a dark horse for you. Yeah, We'll push that one in the direction of our loyal readership, listenership. You were very happy that you unearthed that one. I'm pretty sure, given you took to social media and advised anybody who cared to put in Alan Russell, Christina Aguilera. One of the more random Google searches you'll probably find, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is. Also like the way that he went, because he arrived. We had some photos of him arriving at the stadium, and he was in sort of shirt and cardigan, looking very well dressed. He then came out for the warm ups in his tracksuit. Then he changed back by the time kickoff arrived, which gave an air of Alex Neil at Wembley, didn't it? When he came out in the suit and then went back to the tracksuit, kind of the reverse of that. A little bit of a quiz, Pad. So this may be on the theme of temporary, interim, caretaker managers, whatever you want to go for. Can you name everyone that Norwich City has had since 2000? I'll give you a clue. There is, obviously, Alan Russell is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 6 others. How many of those do you think you can name?
Well,
obviously, I'm including ones who have overseen a game. So, for example, Mike Phelan won't count.
He doesn't count. No. He might dispute that if you go back to that Bournemouth game when Alex Neil powered himself down from the
he had half a game. So
and he had a face like thunder on him, as he sat squirming at the back of the dugout. Well, Adams, clearly.
Yeah,
he took it towards the end of the Premier League season. Gunny before he stepped up again, didn't he? No, I'd have to go away and get my pen and paper out.
You're missing one more recent.
Martin Hunter, didn't he take it on?
Yeah.
One more recent. Not Weaver. Weaver didn't take charge of a game, did he? When it was Farke's. More recent than.
Think after Alex Neil.
Alex Neil. So before. Oh, Alan Irvine. Yeah, Irvine. Yeah.
So you've got 2 more, I believe. To be fair, I'd be quite impressed if you got these.
I said Martin Hunter, didn't I?
Yeah. He was one that I was probably expecting you not to get, actually, but there's two more. So,
not Frankie McAvoy, but there was another Scott. I can't think of his name now. I can picture him. You'll have to help me. But
the two you didn't get, Jim Duffy, who I think is the one you were thinking of, and then Ian Butterworth had 2 games as well, obviously between Brian Gunn and Paul Lambert. So a follow-up question to that, which is maybe pertinent to what we're going to go on to talk about in a minute. How many of those have or did win or have won their first game in caretaker charge of the club?
I remember Gunny, didn't they beat Barnsley, was it? Or Burnley? Yeah. Don't think Neil Adams did off the top of my head. I might be wrong, but I don't think, because he had a pretty horrendous end to that Premier League season post Houghton, didn't he? So, Butterworth, I couldn't tell you. Neither could I with Jim Duffy. I'm going to say Alan Irvine did. That's a guess.
No, but Gunny is the only one out of those 7 who, including now obviously Alan Russell, who won their first game in temporary charge. And actually, if you look at it, draws have been a regular result for Norwich City caretakers. So Martin Hunter that you referenced, I think he was between Nigel Worthington and Peter Grant, wasn't he? So his was a 3-3 draw against QPR. Jim Duffy lost his 3-1 against Bristol City. Brian Gunn obviously beat Barnsley 4-0, quite famous that game. Ian Butterworth had a 1-1 draw at Exeter. Neil Adams, as you referenced, had a 1-0 defeat at Fulham. They should have won that day. I was in the away end. That still irks me. There was a 2-2 draw for Alan Irvine against Blackburn, and then obviously Alan Russell has overseen a 1-1 draw against Reading. And I have to say, actually, if you're looking for an omen, the second game of caretaker spells aren't much better. So Alan Irvine won his 2-0 against Barnsley. Neil Adams lost 3-2 against Liverpool. Ian Butterworth lost 2-1 at Brentford. I think Paul Lambert had already been named as Norwich City's manager at that point. Brian Gunn, although I think I've got a feeling he may have been permanent manager at this point, but he drew 2-2 with Southampton, and then Jim Duffy lost 2-1 against Burnley. So I mean, it's not a great record. So when we talk about kind of instant impacts and uplifts from caretaker bosses, there aren't too many. So Alan Russell will be hoping he can continue the trend, which obviously the maximum he can get now is 4 points, which is what Gunny and Alan Irvine achieved in their 2 games. So there you go. There's a bit of Norwich City tribia for you. That probably leads us nicely on to where Norwich City currently are in terms of their search for head coach. As I said, we're recording this on New Year's Day. The latest reports are that Norwich City are plotting talks with former Huddersfield Town boss David Wagner. He, of course, worked with Stuart Webber at Huddersfield. He was appointed by Stuart Webber at Huddersfield Town in 2015. Some bookmakers have taken their markets down, such as the confidence now of this. The Sun, with those latest reports about scheduled talks as well. I mean, from what we've gathered, Pad, I think from the start, it was obviously going to be very difficult to get a manager in work because of their financial situation. So it did look likely that it was going to be unemployed, and it did feel like there was a preference for a foreign coach. Chuck in what you said there earlier about the statement and the desire for Premier League football again. You're probably hoping for a coach with a promotion on his CV. Well, David Wagner got Huddersfield into the Premier League through the playoffs. He did that with a negative goal difference, by the way. And someone maybe who is a little bit far removed from Daniel Farke in terms of style of play, is someone who likes to press, someone who maybe has a lot of focus on the physical elements. If you want maybe a visualization of what he tries to do, have a little watch of Jurgen Klopp and his Liverpool team and how they like to play, very much in kind of a gegenpressing mould than perhaps Daniel Farke was. But again, maybe represents a step or a step away from him. And certainly Smith had an emphasis on pressing, although I don't think we ever really saw that to full effect. Obviously, no deal done at this stage, and we have no insight to offer at this stage either. But it does feel like David Wagner is, if not leading the race, then certainly in the conversation, Pad. What are your reflections on that and your feelings on that as well? Because I think some people will be quite split on it. There will be some who maybe feel it's quite a lazy appointment given his links to Stuart Webber, and there will be some who look at his championship record with real excitement. Obviously, he's managed Schalke and Young Boys since then. I think Schalke was a little bit of a basket case by all accounts, and was a little bit of a Dean Smith at Norwich City situation. I'm not sure any coach would have kept them up in the guys they were in. Young Boys was a little bit more of a disappointment for him. How do you feel about the name David Wagner in relation to Norwich City's vacant head coach role?
Well, I mean, you've mapped it out quite well. I think that there is, clearly the almost 2 camps emerging about the potential of him to take over. And I think he clearly is a live candidate, absolutely, for for reasons already stated, and also added to that the fact he's out of work and there isn't a financial element that needs to be stressed as well, and the speed that something of that nature could be done as well. To reiterate, where we're at the minute is midway through a 2-game window that Alan Russell confirmed was the brief from Stuart Webber when they got rid of Dean Smith, that these 2 games then take you to basically the thick end of a week's run into Blackburn this coming weekend in the FA Cup, and then another week to Preston. So if Alan Russell is banking on only getting 2 league games, then that would indicate that very soon, before or just after the Blackburn game in the FA Cup, that the new person will be in charge. And as a result, if there's no compensatory hurdles to clear, there's no permission needed to be sought from a current club, the path is a lot easier to get to that point and fit in with that timescale, which seems to be where Stuart Webber's going. So that's before you overlay, of course, the deep relationship he's got with David Wagner. I've seen it firsthand. I remember, can't think which summer it was, but Norwich played Wagner's Schalke in pre-season, and we was out there covering it, and you could see the personal chemistry on the pitch before the game between Wagner and Webber, and Farke, was almost hanging back. It was those two very much, the warmth of their relationship was clear to see, even observing from a distance. So I'm sure that has continued. In fact, I know it's continued. And, the report today, ahead of this record, is that, they're plotting talks. So I'll be very surprised if there hasn't, even in an informal, friendship-based way, been channels of communication either before or after Smith's official departure, such is the nature of it. So, time will tell. Also, what isn't being discussed is, does Wagner want to come back into, at this stage, English football and the challenge of getting Norwich going again? He may. It's interesting. You talk about post Huddersfield. He had that period at Schalke, and then he had the period in Switzerland at Young Boys, and the timing looks right to me, because at Schalke, I think, I'm just going to call it back up again, but he essentially, had a year between being dismissed by Schalke and taking over in Switzerland. He was dismissed in September of 2020, and the following summer he takes over at Young Boys. And as you say, Schalke, I think there was a hell of a lot of issues in and around that football club that expand way beyond what he was trying to do in terms of get that team going. You could argue maybe some parallels with the situation Dean Smith did inherit. So I think he needs to have some slack there. And then in Switzerland, it would appear that anything less than a league title win there was not going to be good enough. They'd won 3 previously, the 3 previous editions of the Swiss top division. He wasn't able to land a 4th one, and he was dismissed in March of last year now, as we've moved into 2023. So I'm just thinking in terms of time out of the game, very similar from Germany to Switzerland, and potentially Switzerland coming back in, be it Norwich or anywhere else. So, that tells me maybe from his point of view, he feels he wants to get back in. And then it's, of course, then about opportunities. And, must be quite attractive if it's a guy who you've worked closely with before and had success before and had this type of success, engineering a championship promotion, winning playoff surge and getting into the Premier League. So, there's a lot of factors why this would seem to make sense and why it would add up. And, then if it is David Wagner, it's, as you said there will be those who think, well, it's showing maybe a lack of thinking outside the box to go back to what you already know. But then if what you already know was successful in this environment, why wouldn't you try it again? And particularly if the other runners and riders, it's a very slim field for all those reasons stated, the financial reasons, the contractual reasons, compensatory reasons. Go back to that statement. When Dean Smith was sacked, the club said they'd embark on a search and promotion to the Premier League remains the aim. Well, again, Alan Russell is right. They don't have a minute to spare, let alone a game, let alone a block of games, let alone a month or two. It has to happen pretty instantaneously. And so if that is the case, you're trying to lessen the variables. And what they can't afford is to bring in somebody who has no real knowledge of English football, the Championship particularly, and needs time to acclimatise. They don't have time. So, we'll wait. Obviously, there's a process to go through, but it does at this stage seem 2 point to Wagner, and if so, it'd be very interesting how part 2 of the Webber Wagner dynamic works. It's worked before. Webber wasn't there to see it through to the finish. He'd already moved on to Norwich by that stage, but no doubt he was one of the key architects, and it was him who went to Germany and got Wagner to Huddersfield, and obviously repeated that with huge success up until the last 12 months with Daniel Farke. Same Borussia Dortmund 2 coach, same background, different coaches in terms of style of play. It's worth reiterating that, as you said, he's more of the Klopp heavy metal, high pressing type of coach. And I've seen 1 or 2 comments already from fans on social media about good luck with this current group of Norwich players to get them playing a high press, high intensity type of football. But Alan Russell was trying to do something similar just before the weekend. So, yeah, I think ultimately at this stage, as we record, it looks like Wagner. And if it is Wagner, then, I'm not certainly in the camp where I look at this narrative that he's failed in Switzerland and he's failed in Germany. Why would you want him? I tend to look at the context of those 2 postings. He didn't really fail in Switzerland. He just didn't, maintain what they've done, which is domestically dominating Swiss football. He did actually get them into the Champions League qualifying stages where they beat Manchester United in the group stages as well. So, I'm sure he would counter that his record isn't 2 failures off the back of what happened at Huddersfield. And Huddersfield, it's worth reiterating, he did keep them up that first season against the odds, massively against the odds. But he did keep them up. And then the second time round, from a distance, he left towards the end of that season. And it felt like, his quotes and everything he said and his demeanour, that maybe he was burnt out with it all. Because much like his style of football, I look at him and I think he's that all-in type of coach, and it's very intense. And, maybe you can work at that 5th gear for a period of time, but by the end at Huddersfield, it did look like he was a little bit burnt out with it all. So, I look at his record and I think the David Wagner and the Huddersfield that came to Carrow Road in that 16-17 season and did for Alex Neil, yes, please, I'd have that style of football here all day long, because they were very good. They were very good on the eye, and they were very aggressive, and they were in your face. And I'm sure Norwich fans would love to see that style of football. Whether ultimately from this position it would be good enough to navigate themselves back to the Premier League at the first time of asking, we don't know. But I think it's certainly an intriguing link and an easy link, and time will tell. But ultimately, I think you'd be probably at this stage wise not to look beyond Wagner. But as I say, until it's confirmed, until it's a done deal, and the way these things are moving now, it probably won't be too much longer before we do get that confirmation. Zoe Webber in a matchday column for Reading indicated that it would be a fairly swift process, and it has to be, because ultimately, it'll be Russell and it'll be Weaver for Watford on Monday afternoon. But by the time they go to Preston, it'll be a new man. And the earlier they do it, the more chance, particularly if there's an experimental FA Cup game as well, throw in the mix for that new person to start the process of, galvanising a group of players who we still all, I think, believe are better than what they've shown thus far and are good enough to be in the conversation. Whether they are now able to galvanise themselves to the point where they can, repeat what they did in terms of getting promoted the last 2 times at this level. I think the title clearly is not going to happen, but to get themselves promoted again, then time will tell. They've certainly made things very difficult for them, but let's use the club's own measure. Even post Dean Smith, Premier League remains the objective. So if it is David Wagner, then he knows what the brief is.
Yeah, another point I would make on that is, as you said, time is pressing, really pressing, and Stuart Webber will likely, as you said, want to make an appointment who understands English football, understands the Championship, isn't coming into it completely blind, has achieved promotion before, but equally there's that dynamic, isn't there, as well? The element of working with a new sporting director, that how that relationship works, how it works day to day, but also long term. Well, that isn't something that would need a bedding in period. Those two know each other extremely well. They would almost be picking up where they left off, wouldn't they? It wouldn't be kind of, oh, well, you know, we need 3 months where we kind of know how each other work and know how the dynamic of it works. It would be pretty immediate that David Wagner would come in, know what Stuart Webber would want, know what Norwich City would want, and would be able to implement it. And what I would say, actually, is his Huddersfield team in the year that they did get promoted, I felt was one of the most tactically interesting teams in the division, with players who I think by common consensus he managed to ensure that they punched above their weight, both in the Championship but also then to remain in the Premier League. It was a massive job that he did at Huddersfield, but they were probably in, certainly from an external perspective, maybe a worse position than Norwich City were in, and managed to get promoted. He obviously had a period of time as well before that season where I think they finished something like 15th or 16th. So yeah, that's going to be an interesting one to watch develop. I would imagine now, it feels at least like all roads point to David Wagner. Of course, I think there's been a couple of reports as well suggesting Chris Wilder and Hamburg coach Tim Volter as suggestions. I mean, we've spoken about Tim Volter before privately, Pad. I think that one looks and feels quite difficult because of where he is with Hamburg. I haven't even explored it in terms of work permit route, but I would imagine if those reports are accurate and Norwich City considering him, then he would be okay. There is a contractual situation with him lingering in the background. Hamburg don't play until the 29th of January in their next game, but that feels quite difficult. Chris Wilder, again, someone who has experience of the division, but it has to be said, didn't have a particularly enjoyable spell at Middlesbrough, although I think he was kind of fluttering his eyelashes at Bournemouth for the majority of that. That was obviously under Kieran Scott as well, who formerly of Norwich City, and there have been kind of reports since that maybe the idea of him working under a sporting director has been a little bit difficult as well. So we will see. And in terms of Schalke, actually, I mean, we're probably not best placed to really comment on that. So I'm going to read a tweet that Dan O'Hagan put out on what day is it today? Sunday? Is it Sunday? It is Sunday. Sunday morning. He spoke about David Wagner's potential appointment or interest from Norwich City in David Wagner, and he said this certainly would appear to be a possibility given the Webber connection. Harsh to judge Wagner on his time at Schalke. This is an interesting line. All the Viagra in the world wouldn't have kept that team up. His body at work at Huddersfield stands up. Does feel like chasing a Farker Mark II a little bit. So there is Dan O'Hagan's thoughts on his time in Germany. I don't think Schalke have done that well since he left the football club. By all accounts, difficult club to manage. Young boys again, maybe felt a little bit more disappointing considering they were the reigning champions of Switzerland at that point. I think they finished 15 points behind FC Zurich, who went on to win the title in the season that he was there. But they did have a really good win against Manchester United in the group stages of the Champions League that you may remember. So that's going to be an interesting one. I mean, Paddy, again, let's follow the David Wagner thread for a minute. Obviously, another report again this morning from The Athletic about maybe a 4-person shortlist and David Wagner being part of that. So again, David Wagner's name being mentioned. I've mentioned maybe 2 others who could potentially be part of that 4-person shortlist if that turns out to be accurate. This is rightly or wrongly. Let's be hypothetical. Let's say David Wagner ends up as the next head coach of Norwich City Football Club. There are going to be a lot of people who look at Stuart Webber and say, well, and maybe this is quite a lazy argument. I'm sure he would argue that it is, but it is an argument that I have seen made nonetheless. I'm just repeating it. It's not my opinion. But there will be some people who look at him and say, well, you've just gone back to one of the 2 managers who have proven successful for you before. There may be people inside the game who look at that and saying, well, his contact book is a little bit limited, or, you know, his methods might be even a little bit limited if it's only certain coaches that can work within those constraints. So for him, I guess if we do end up at a press conference where it is in the next few days, as I imagine it will be, next week to a few days, as it will be, and it's David Wagner being unveiled as Norwich City's head coach, how he markets that and how Norwich City market that are going to be really interesting, but also probably really necessary for this appointment as well to get people on side.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, not that we're going to give him any PR advice, but you would surely be pushing the...
We're not paid enough for that. There's people who...
I don't think they take our advice, to be honest, Connor, but that's another podcast. But you surely push the element of with the constraints in terms of time and where they are in the table now, they need certainties. And here's a guy who got a club promoted. I'm a guy, if it's Stuart Webber who's putting this out there, I'm a guy who employed him. We worked together closely. We brought success from a similar kind of position in terms of nobody really gave Huddersfield a chance that season to come through the pack as they did, and Norwich are going to have to do something similar. Obviously, wildly different expectations at the start of those respective seasons, but in the here and now, the challenge is not that dissimilar. So surely you would sell the merits of in a climate where you need certainty rather than potential, or a sense that things could come together. No, things have come together with that duo before in the Championship to engineer a playoff success, and with the added caveat, and I think you'd put that on the table as well to convince any doubters, a head coach who kept a team who clearly were long odds to go down, straight back down, as Norwich have the last two times they've tried it. No, he kept them in the division. So why wouldn't you amplify and accentuate those positives? Yes, of course, as I said at the outset, they'll probably, if it is to be Wagner, there will be those two opposing camps, and in the other camp will be it smacks of a lack of imagination and a lack of ambition. Going back to something that worked before doesn't necessarily mean or bring any guarantees it works again. Football moves on very swiftly. You could package it as he's not really worked at his next two career postings, whatever the circumstances around both of those clubs, and he's out of work. So how desirable should he be as a managerial commodity? But maybe the truth lies somewhere between those two polar opposites, and ultimately, as always, Stuart Webber won't have the benefit of hindsight. He's trying to do this front-ended and hope it pays off. It paid off with Farker, let's be honest, to give him his due. Didn't pay off with Smith. So, he's 1-1. So let's hope his next managerial appointment it has the Farker impact, certainly at this level, as opposed to the Dean Smith impact. But, without opening up the whole sort of mood of where the club feels like it's sat at the minute and has been for the last 12 months, and that almost sense that it needs to come back together, all the disparate elements inside and outside the football club, and that something hasn't been working. The relationship is fractured. The various different relationships that make up a football club haven't been everybody pulling in the right direction. That's probably going to be, colour a lot of how this appointment is viewed, because it isn't an appointment in isolation. It's an appointment to try and fix something that is broken down, and not just purely in terms of on the pitch and what the head coach is trying to do in the dugout with this group of players. So, there's bigger issues than who the identity of the new head coach is, clearly, and they won't be repaired by whether it's David Wagner or whoever. But if you can try and detach yourself from that, fundamentally, you're bringing in a guy who has course and distance form at this level and has been a success at this level. And right now, that's what Norwich need. They need somebody to get this group of players into a fighting shape that they can come through the Championship minefield, if it is to be the playoffs, and emerge victorious. This guy has form for doing that. So, I don't. In that sense, it's not really a gamble. Whether he can replicate it, that's the element we'll find out, obviously, in due course. But then, whoever walked through the door, whether it was Wagner or whoever, the same types of questions would be asked about, because there's no guarantees. Ultimately, there's no guarantees. I look at Corberan now getting West Brom going. I think they'll be there or thereabouts. I look at what Michael Carrick is doing at Middlesbrough, and it could be Wagner, and Wagner could have a positive impact, but it still might not be enough, because there's other clubs who are a bit further down their development cycles, and Norwich aren't able to make the ground up. So be it. But that won't necessarily mean a Wagner appointment is a failed appointment. It just might mean the deck is too far stacked against if it is Wagner. So, but ultimately, I think most reasonable Norwich fans would give him a chance and say, yeah, we'll row in behind now. even if they have a few reservations for reasons you mapped out there. But ultimately, if people don't come back together, then they've got absolutely zero chance of pulling off another Championship promotion success.
Agreed, and it's going to be really, really interesting. I'm old enough to remember when a lot of Norwich fans were crying for David Wagner when Stuart Webber first came in. You don't become a bad coach overnight. You don't become a good coach overnight. So maybe an argument that he hasn't perhaps picked his jobs in the best way since leaving Huddersfield Town. As you said, I think he would come in with a point to prove. I think there are pros and cons as to his potential appointment. I'm sure if this ramps up in maybe the way that we're expecting in the next few days, we will be having a lot of those discussions across our channels. So we shall see. Of course, you can get in touch with us and let us know your thoughts on the potential appointment of David Wagner via social media, via email, all of that good stuff. We always like to hear your thoughts and opinions. Let's move on then, Pad, and let's talk about the year that's been 2022. I think it's one that most people will be quite grateful to see the back of and almost stick two fingers up that it's gone. I'm going to read you the numbers of the year, really, which I'm afraid don't make for good reading. So if you're of a nervous disposition, maybe the best time now to just stick your fingers in your ears for the next minute or so. So this is Norwich City's league record in 2022, 44 games played. They won 13 of those. I've got to be honest, that's 10 more than I can remember off the top of my head. They've drawn 9. They've lost 22. They picked up 48 points. Points per game rate of 1.09 is the second lowest since 2003. The lowest is in 2013 when they achieved 1.03. For context, a lot of those came in the Premier League, as did, I suppose, this time around. Goals for 47, goals against 70. Obviously, 43 of those games were under the stewardship of Dean Smith, one under Alan Russell, assisted by Steve Weaver. I mean, it's not great, is it, Pad? It's a year of very, very, very few highlights for Norwich City supporters.
Yeah, and I saw last night, New Year's Eve, and I'm not going to doubt the statistical effort that went into it, but somebody compiled a 2022 league table for all 92 league clubs and ranked them based on, you're essentially spanning 2 seasons there. If you've not seen it, Connor, where do you think Norwich ranked out of those 92 clubs? So essentially their points all over the second half of the Premier League,
right,
and the first part of the Championship, i.e. Dean Smith's tenure.
Well, it can't be that high. 72?
Oh, 75th.
Have I gone too high there?
No, well, you were in the book very close. 75th out of 92
clubs.
I'll
take that.
I know, but if you're Dean Smith, you wouldn't take it. Or
No.
So out of 92 clubs over the calendar year, Norwich performed only better than, what's that, my maths, 15, 18.
You set yourself up there. You had to see it out.
So 17 clubs were only out of the 92. And to rub salt in, Ipswich were 10th, I think, on that table, which shows you the impact McKenna's had there. And I know it's all relative, Premier League, League One, Stockport were up there quite high. I think they had did they come through from the National League? I can't quite remember. But anyway, I think it does give you a sense, though, of a club who were firmly in reverse gear and as a result, a truly forgettable 12 months in Norwich's timeline. And that's why, we're all hoping that new year, new head coach appointment and something that is far more optimistic and positive. And whether that come May is good enough to be back in the Premier League, time will tell. It feels a long way off. But for me, if there was enough evidence that they've fallen short, but you can see now under another that this club is moving forward again on the pitch and off it, and that there's a bit more optimism about what comes the other side for next season in the Championship. Of course, the massive overhanging issue there is the finances and what another season of Championship football does for the balancing of the books. It wouldn't be a good scenario. You'd have all those sadly contractual issues with players who are out of contract next summer to pick your way through, and no doubt quite a few of those would move on as well if it was another season in the Championship. So I'm not saying it'd be our cup would runneth over with optimism, but at least if they finished in a forward motion. And my mind does go back to the 16-17 season, which Huddersfield under Wagner emerged. And obviously Norwich went in a very bold direction at the end of that season with Webber and then ultimately Farker. But on the pitch, actually, Alan Irvine did go very close to just squeezing in the playoffs, and they played some very good football at that period post Alex Neil. I think he went round about the March of that season. But they did ultimately fall short. But it was some good football, and there was a bit of positivity around the place, which was then obviously added to by the Webber, Farker, new era, new beginnings kind of feel around the place. So, I think if we're talking about 22, park it, forget about it. It was horrendous. Very, very few enjoyable moments, games. Horrible, in fact, in many respects. A real growing chasm between the football club and the people who follow it. And we won't go into the debates about what constitutes a disconnect and what doesn't. We all know that there's been elements of fans and club who've been growing apart. That's not healthy. I guess the only positive, maybe, as it pops into my head, is the appearance of a potential white knight in shining armour in Mark Atanasio. If that relationship flourishes into potentially one day, taking on the reins from the club's current majority shareholders, so that maybe that would be a positive legacy from 22, but on the pitch and off it, not good by a long stretch, and not a 12 months. I don't think we'd wish to sort of relive again through the prism of Norwich City support. That's for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned Alan Irvine's record there. I mean, just to reflect on it, actually, a lot of clubs probably would have handed him the permanent job off the back of this. 10 games, 5 wins, 2 draws, 3 defeats. I mean, it's not bad. But you're right, it is going to take a seismic impact. I mean, I don't want to sit here and unpick the year that's been particularly, because I don't think that will be enjoyable for us or for people to listen to. So we'll try and distill it down into a few things. You said there were very few enjoyable moments. I'm probably going to ask you to pick one now. I mean, for me personally, it was that 3-0 win at Watford, because that was the night, if there was any at all, where it felt like maybe potentially that Dean Smith could have kept Norwich City in the Premier League. Obviously, from there it imploded pretty dramatically. But it felt there was at least some hope, and there wasn't too much of that in 2022. So for you, Pad, I mean, most enjoyable game, that there's not many to choose from, to be honest.
No, I mean, my mind was thinking before you said Watford, the Everton game, which preceded it, I think, which was Adam Ida's first Premier League goal. I know it was at the end of era for Rafa Benitez, so there was a bit of kind of looking through the mirror now at maybe what Norwich have had to experience, certainly towards the end of last season. But that was a fan base who wasn't having that manager. But Norwich profited, and but it was a vibrancy, and there was an energy, and there was a thrust to how Norwich played that day. Fully deserved the win. And then you hoped, well, this could be obviously then embellished further by what happened at Vicarage Road a few days later. So maybe if I put those two together, that was the period really when optimism was rife under Dean Smith, that he could galvanise an effort out of this group. But subsequent events proved that wasn't to be the case, and they exited every bit as limply as they did under Farker the previous time in the Premier League. So, and then the Championship, well, there's been one or two good. I've enjoyed the backs to the wall efforts at Blackpool. That was a good, mainly because we were in. It felt like we were actually ensconced with the away support, given the proximity of the media sort of set up at Bloomfield Road, and felt like we were living it as a fan that day. And that kind of 1-0 away win, you're putting your bodies on your line, the wind and the rain howling in off the North Sea. There was something quite uplifting about that whole experience. So I quite enjoyed that day out in the Championship. But overall, no, it's been a slog and a grind, culminating, of course, in the club having to make that change just after Boxing Day. But no, you'd be very hard pressed to pick out too many moments on the pitch that will linger in 2022. That's for sure.
Yeah, you will. I haven't really got much more positive that we can say for that. I mean, you could go best goal. I think that probably goes to Josh Sargent, doesn't it, against Watford? It's very hard to think of anything else. Here's one for you, Pat. Signing of the year. I'll throw that one in. What have you got for that? I mean, it doesn't feel like there's too many positive ones.
Well, I mean, signing of the year would discount that kind of horrendous summer going into the Premier League, which produced Rashica, which produced Sargent et al. Who did they actually do last January? You have to remind me.
Did they do any?
They didn't. No, they didn't, did they? Because Smith, Smith
No.
didn't have any. They basically spent up the previous summer. So
you've got 4 to choose from there:
no,
Aaron Ramsey, Gabriel Sara, Marcelino Nunez, or Isaac Hayden.
Well, they're in. If you want a microcosm of where we're at with Norwich City, then it boils down to if you're Ian asked to pick your best signing out of that crop, and Ramsey, of course, who's now sadly injured. I mean, it'd have to be probably one of the 2 South Americans, but it'd be a toss of a coin. Nunez started tremendously.
I think I'll go Sara on current trajectory.
Yeah, but Zara, I mean, and Alan Russell labelled his performance against Reading on Friday as probably his best in a green and yellow shirt, and there's been signs of that. So the dial probably does tip now towards Zara, but by no manner of means could you say there's an outstanding signing in 2022. Not at this stage, anyway. It may prove to be the case, but not 6 months into to their careers, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it's not a glowing endorsement, is it, of Gabriel Sara to be the best of that bunch at this moment in time? So, yeah, not a great year, 2022. I mean, Pat, just a final one on this point. 10 years time, when people look back at 2022, what are going to be their memories of it? I think we've maybe captured that, but if we were going to put it in a sentence or a few words, how do you think this year is going to be remembered, and what kind of impact is it going to have moving forward?
Well, as I say, I mean, crystal ball gazing as we are, but it'll be instantly forgettable on the pitch, and you'd like to think that the sort of divisions that it's felt like that the time will be a good healer for that. But if it was the first sighting of a US investor who took the club over in due course and then took them on the type of journey that he's built up at the Brewers and established them as an operation in their field of sports, who punch above their weight and can mix it with the big boys, which when I spoke to, I'm forgetting his name now, Dan Goroff, apologies, Dan, former MLB official with the Phillies, a club who've jousted with the Brewers. His sense was that Atanasio likes giving the big boys a bloody nose and almost, against the odds kind of thing. Well, if this turns out to be how he takes on Norwich, first and foremost, and then moves them forward, then 10 years down the line, we might be looking at dare I say it, if there is a Premier League, then Norwich in a Premier League who fight against the big boys against, vastly inferior resources. That would be the dream 10 years from now. And if that came to pass, then we would look back at 22 as the year when that journey began, essentially. But we certainly won't reflect on 22, relegation from the Premier League, a patchy 6 months to be kind that culminated in the dismissal of a head coach. I don't think there's any way that could live long in the memory as a season to reflect on with any greater fondness or affection. So, yeah, for me, 10 years from now, the only legacy from this year would hopefully be the start of a move towards an owner and an era of actual sustainability, but good enough as a club to actually do a passable impression of being a Premier League entity, rather than we're just stopping by for 9 months and we'll exit swiftly as we arrived, and we won't enjoy it, and we certainly won't be competitive. I don't think anybody wants that.
No, I think that's a good way to sum it up. Obviously, Norwich host Watford on Monday. That game may well have happened by the time some people get round to listen to this. So, as I said, we're not going to speak about that too much. We'll, of course, be at Carrow Road for that game tomorrow to bring you full coverage. Obviously, an interesting game because two clubs who are in the top 7 as heading into the New Year Day sort of round of fixtures. Obviously, Norwich play on the second, but two clubs who maybe aren't in the best nick at this moment in time, with Norwich City managerless and Watford probably managerless soon, but certainly not on a good trajectory, having just been beaten by Swansea pretty comprehensively. So that's going to be an interesting one. Obviously, Norwich over the last however long don't have a very good record against Watford either. I mean, that 3-0 win at Vicarage Road that came in February, did it last year. I mean, that's a fairly rare point for Norwich City to have recorded points against Watford. I think their last win before that came in that 4-2 game where they were already relegated, or their relegation was confirmed. Can't quite remember the history behind that, but that was the last time they beat Watford. In every game in between then, they've failed to do so. So we shall see if Alan Russell and Steve Weaver can in what is likely to be their last game in charge, certainly their last league game in charge, whether they can complete it with a win. That's probably all from us. I mean, what's left to say? But make sure you get yourself a PinkUn Plus subscription. I know we bang on about it a lot, so don't take our words for it. I'm going to read you a tweet from Twitchy Terry, who that's his username. We've not paid him to say this, by the way. He said, took a punt on PinkUn Plus at the start of this year. It's basically all I'm using for NCFC news now. So there you go. That's not our words. So those are the words of the people that use it. So make sure you jump on and check it out for yourself. You can claim a free trial now. Go to pinkun.com, press subscribe in the top right-hand corner, and you can follow all the details to get full access to that. Plenty of Norwich City content around, of course, their head coach search, around the championship schedule, interviews, columns, all sorts over there. You really are missing out if you're not on that platform already. As I said, you can get what is it? Is it a month's trial? I've forgotten. It is.
3 months. Yeah, 1 month free. Then
there you go.
£2 a month. Yeah, good salesperson tactics there, mate. But
thank you. So it's almost like
you won't get better value, and that's us saying it. But if you don't take our word for it, take Twitchy's word for it, and go and try it out yourself. No obligation. You don't like it, can it? And continue on your path to Norwich City content, imbibing. That's the right word, is it? But however you want to consume, consumption is probably the better word. But try it; it'll change your life.
There you go. That seems like an apt place to leave it for this week. Happy New Year to, of course, all of our listeners. I hope you had a wonderful festive period and Christmas as well. And we will, of course, keep bringing you these podcasts throughout 2023. Let's hope that as we reflect on this year, we're reflecting on it very positively in a year's time. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you again very, very, very soon.